Well, yeah, welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Meandering Sessions. This is a session where I, Kyron, and
Juan over here.
Juan on the other side go out to the park. We're at our local one near my house again. We'll get to South Bank eventually.
Yeah.
But we go outside and we have a deep conversation with a lighthearted touch, focusing on the lighthearted. So this is just general observations, realizations, perhaps some interesting topics that we've gained from the week.
Yep.
Something like that. Now, I was saying to you before, we caught up with some friends last night, and it actually has taken away some of the topics.
A lot of topics that you had in your mind.
Yeah, because I'd just kind of be repeating things to you, which you heard already.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get onto the topic of actually like losing time. So last night, I lost track of time, man. Like we were just, got some food. Then we went somewhere, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's maybe like 10:30, and we're only together for what, 5 hours, maybe
5 hours.
something like that. And man, it went by in a flash, and I was just like, dang, I would have guessed we were there for maybe like 3.5 hours.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep.
So I was wondering, like, what is it about those sorts of things which actually make you lose track of time? Like, is it like do you hate the universe in that the stuff that you really enjoy, that you're really having fun, is also the fastest, and you go, fuck, like, will there ever be a time where you were talking about the Tim Ferriss idea of you going somewhere and the time for him seemed longer whilst he was having fun. How did he manage to do that?
Not longer. So I didn't say specifically the time felt longer. It was that the experiences contained within a period of time was what you would experience over like a 6-month period. And so there was a feeling that you'd experienced a lot more, and perhaps it was longer, but he didn't really call out that like it felt longer. It was just that there was a lot of experiences packed in there, and so in turn it felt like you had filled the 6 months amount of stuff that you would do into a short period of time. So maybe it does translate to that, maybe it doesn't. I know Andrew Huberman talked about this, and I can't remember what the scientific paper is, but it is to do with dopamine. So it's to do with the way that your dopamine, when you have dopamine being released, it actually plays a factor into your dilation of time. So that is why there's obviously aging.
More equals shorter time, I guess.
I think it was something like that. So the study that they did was something along the lines of someone who'd been given basically like drugs to raise their dopamine levels would be underestimating the amount of time. No, overestimating the amount of time that was actually going past. So it was something like, it was like 2 minutes or 5 minutes of study. They were like, okay, tell us when 5 minutes have gone by, but when they're at a high dopamine level, then they would go and overthink it. So they'd be like, oh, at 3 minutes, they'd be like, oh man, probably 5 minutes have passed or something like that. And then the opposite was also seen without it. So it seems to me like obviously there's going to be something genetically / chemically that's happening that creates that. So can you get rid of that? No, unless you go in there and tinker with your brain and tinker with like your hormones and everything coming out. Sure. But I think it's also something to do with like time passing by as well. Like the older you are, there is definitely that like phenomenon that as you get older, time passes quicker. It is because the space of time that you have lived is longer, and the ratio between the period, like the moment that you're living based on your life in comparison is shorter. So there is that feeling where everyone will have had this. If you're listening in, the immortality, if you go from a kid and you get to an adult, you're like, oh wow, a month now goes way quicker, or days go way quicker. Perhaps you don't notice it in the micro. Days might still feel like a lot of days, and within the micro, if you're having a really phenomenal time, a really boring time or something like that, then it might feel like it's extended, like you're watching the clock. But as you age, there is the phenomenon that time will seem compacted because of the amount that you've lived.
I think it's also because you've done the same things over and over. So you're experiencing, when you've been in a job for 3 years, that next month is not the same as the first month that you were there. Because I do remember whilst traveling, that was a pretty long year. That year felt like a decent stretch of time. Whereas like I would almost in my own mind now see from 2022 through to 2019, those kind of 3 years is about the same as that 1 year
Right.
that I was traveling. Like that 3 years kind of feels
It's like a comparison sort
in
of
my
thing.
mind. Those two are kind
Yeah.
of equivalent, and that's because I have been largely having very similar experiences over these last 3 years.
I think there's also the concept of the saying that if there was someone to be immortal and they live forever, you would get to a point in time where you couldn't interact normally with the human beings who are existing in a normal cadence of living and dying in like a 100-year period, because to you it would seem like a day has passed, where for them it's a lifetime. So your like ability to connect with normal people would actually dissipate, because the feeling of time would just be completely different for you. Obviously, who knows whether that actually would prove true, or like, you know, would your brain not have to deteriorate or something like that? I don't know, but I have heard that concept and I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. And I see that, you know, I'm sure you would see it now where you just feel like, oh, it's another Christmas. Oh man, like already it's like this thing, and it just feels like it's a little bit faster. It's a little bit faster. It's a little bit faster. So,
Yeah, I struggle with immortality. I think that's a silly idea.
immortality.
Yeah, I was listening to Ray Kurzweil on Lex's podcast, and he was sort of, you know, he was thinking like, yeah, I've got a decent stretch to be able to live to, you know, if I live another 10 years, then by that, in 10 years' time, we'll have gotten a life extension. We'll have hidden that. I can't remember whether there was a term for it, but it was like they'd now developed enough technology to be able to extend the life, to keep your life,
keep you going.
until you're able to reach like the immortality sort of thing. I don't know. People over the many centuries have all been looking for the fountain of youth, that immortality thing. I'm not sure it exists, and I think you'd.
Oh, like
if you get it,
it exists.
You would go crazy.
I'll say
How does it
it
exist?
exists in some creatures. There are animals that evolve, like they grow old and they grow young and then they grow old, and so it's essentially they just, unless they get killed, they just live forever. So there is that already exists.
So they're not immortal then.
Sure, but I guess what you just said then wasn't immortality. What you said then was extension of living, to the point, like what he was saying in that conversation with like Freeman was he would get to a point where his extension of living would be able to keep on going. If he gets hit by a car or run over by a truck, he's still dead.
He was using extension of living and immortality.
Yeah, so and I disagree. I was like, that's wrong, because if you get smashed by an asteroid, well, good luck. There's no technology that's gonna put together your blobs of DNA together again. To be a human.
Yeah, but even along even the thought of living to 300, I'm skeptical it'll happen.
I kind of agree with. I can't remember how Lex was talking about it there, but I would imagine what Lex would talk about it, Lex Friedman, of. I think the extension of life then kind of takes away some of the beauty of life as it is, of its length, you know, because there's
bloody Russians.
There's certain like spaces and like spaces in life where they talk about like the first 20 odd years and the next 20, then the next 20, the next 20, and it is very different. And sometimes people talk about it like in a what call like springtime, wintertime, summertime, that sort of thing, or that sort of mentality. And each one of them serves a purpose in the way that generations are built over time. So, you know, whatever. But if you all of a sudden just extended that and just like, oh, we went again, and it went again, and it went again, I think it would lose some of its luster. Like there's a part of the joy of life, because it also that finite availability to it. So, you know, if you're traveling and you're at on the beach in Greece, you might be like, shit, like this might be one of the last times I'm here. Or conversely, you know that a family member's dying, you're like, cool, like, wow, there's like, I'm really making the most I can here for this. You know, if everyone lived forever, I don't think that you would have as much of a connection. There wouldn't be as much of a joy in things, at least in those specific scenarios, because you might be like, oh, well, I'll go see that beach in 500 years or 700 years. Like, who cares, sort of thing. Yeah. So I think it would lose some of its luster for sure. I see it as like, I want to live, again, I've said that on the podcast, I want to live a really long, healthy life and then die really quickly. Just, that's it, dead. So I could imagine, like, if I'd say, like, what would it be? Maybe like 110, healthy, like maybe 108 years old, really healthy, and then deteriorate, cool, die at 110. Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. But if you said, like, oh, what if there was a scientific thing that could really push you to be like 300 years old, 400 years old? I'd have to see like some really convincing evidence that you're going to be, one, healthy to that point, like to the point that you're able to communicate and be like a human being. And then it would also have to be like a societal tip where I would feel odd being the odd one out being like that. Like, being like, oh, that's the 180-year-old person, like, over there. It just seems at odds with the world. You'd almost feel a little bit like an alien to the generations around you.
Yeah, I don't think I think you're missing the point of living healthily and then dying quickly, which is, would you do that? Would you want that if you could only live to 65? Which I think is more realistic.
What do you mean?
You're saying you want to live to 110, which is far beyond the current human lifespan, and be healthy. I think the trade-off is more you could live to 110, but from 80 onwards, you can't walk without hurting yourself, or you can live to 65 very healthily and then die very quickly. I think
no. Actually, that's why
you have to choose between. I'm God putting this now. You have to choose between these two. No. This is my scenario.
This is a scenario. So you choose.
You can live to 110, but from 80 years onwards, it's you can't move without, like, you can't walk without having some pain, or you can
like just some
die
mild
at
pain?
65. Mild pain, which increases.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. That fuck it, easy. Just do that. Like, I'm talking if you say like 80, but you can't communicate anymore because you're slurring your speech, and you can no longer drive, and you can no longer walk at all. Like, at all. There's like not just like it's painful. It's like, oh no, you can't.
Well, that's what happens at 100. So it's like 80. 80 is when it's starting to become like inconvenient, and it's progressing badly each year and year and year.
Yeah. But I mean, and so if you look down into the, and of course, I don't know the deals, but like I know Peter T and a few other doctors have talked about it, and the way that they plan it out, they go, okay, what is that last decade that you basically want to be at your healthiest, and you probably be like, you'd be happy that at that point you die, right? So let's say you said it was 100 or 110. Cool. Then there are some markers around your VO2, about your HCl, about all these other markers, and they go, cool, let's work backwards. Okay, that means that at 30 years old, 40 years old, you need to be at like this level of fitness, you need to be at this level of whatever, so that because the reason that you know, as you're saying, oh, at 70 you're not as healthy, it's because you deteriorate, right? There's like, and it deteriorates not at linear, not at exponential, not obviously everyone's going to deteriorate at the same rate, but there's a general consensus of a band of where you're going to deteriorate. So you can quite accurately predict, cool, if you're this healthy at this particular age, you know, barring you getting absolutely killed by getting hit by something, falling, whatever, you can't do much about that, then you can kind of predict, cool, okay, by 100 you will still be really healthy and able to do X, Y, Z if you put in the work to get to that point. So to your question of the God one, I'd say 80, but I don't think that it's definitely not out of the realm of possibilities that you could get to 100 now and be relatively healthy, relatively mobile. But there's going to come a limit. I would say, like, you know, I'm throwing a number out there like 110. Maybe that's not possible. But I'd say, you know, if that was the aim, I'd be totally happy that if I reached around that time and then death happened really quickly, cool, that's fine. As long as I'm healthy and mobile. Because if you said the same question of maybe if I got to 50 and then I wasn't like mobile, I wasn't like, it was painful to walk and stuff, do I want to live to 110? No, probably not.
I don't think you answered the question. So it's like 65, you're really healthy, 65 die. Then, but
no,
80.
So not 65. I'd say 80.
So you would take the long kind of painful process.
Yeah.
Like,
so like
from 100 to 110.
The way that you explained it, that didn't sound painful. So I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'd do that.
80 is when you start having problems, and then it's like 30 years of gradually those problems getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. So I'll take that. I'll take that still over 65. I think those 6 years is still formidable difference. What would you pick?
Yeah, probably the longer one.
Probably the longer one. Yeah, I think I wouldn't say that over and above I'd be displeased by that. But then my general track would be like, okay, how healthy can I be for the longest that I can be, sort of mentality.
Well, I'm just trying to think, man. I don't really know many people above 90, and I don't really see many people above 90, even just in day-to-day living, like out in South Bank and things like that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. You like, there's how many 90-year-olds out there do people know, like me and what you know, that are walking around, doing their own shopping, that sort of stuff, right? That's probably not many. I personally know some, not around here. Like, I know people who are, 95, 97, and they are still going to do the shopping, they're still driving, they're still doing the stuff. They're not at peak condition, and I wouldn't be seeing them any, like, run or something like that. But they're still mobile. Like, they're still living. Cool. Fine. That's wonderful. Like, that's like probably what I would want. And you got to remember that that's them growing up through a time when what the age that we are, that was back in the 50s, 60s. So, yes, is there going to be some advances in science that will extend that? Absolutely. I don't actually know what the average expectancy right now of like males are? Do you know?
Probably about 81.
Let's see, average.
Yeah, I mean, it depends which country.
Yeah.
I know the US is going slightly down because of their opioid stuff and whatnot, and it. I believe that males are slightly less than females, and it was kind of like 85 and 81, or 83 and 81, something like that.
Yeah, it looks like. So I'm reading off a graph. In Australia, a boy born in 2018 to 2020 can expect to live to the age of 81.2 years, and a girl would be expected to live to 85.3 years.
Yeah.
Compared to 51 and 54 in 1891 and 1900. Now,
yeah.
I don't expect that. That means that it's going to go up another 30 years to 120 because there's an actual...
You would or wouldn't?
I wouldn't expect it to go like that. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't expect it to be like just linear and go, because there are like genuine things within the body that just will stop working before that. There is a limitation of a general human body, whether it's heartbeat, whether it's the corrosion of like your arteries, stuff like that. Like, you're going to have a full body replacement if you're going to live beyond a certain point. I wouldn't be up for that. So whatever the limit is of human like plausibility, that's why I just like go like 110 seems roughly like real. Like people have lived to that point and we're like not like waltzing around and dancing, but they seem to be like living and being kind of okay. So I'm like, oh, that seems like a good number. Definitely wouldn't be saying like 180. Like I'm going to aim for 180. No, that's probably not the way to go.
Didn't you say that in one of the
not
podcasts?
180. No. And I think I did say in one of the podcasts. I said like 150. 150 would be, but I would probably shift my mindset to like
because there's such a big difference.
Being the reverse of getting to being 150. Or the calculations, kind of like how Peter here is talking about. Okay, well, if you're going to live to 150 and be like healthy, cool. What level of fitness do you have to be, and what's the threshold that you can go past so that the deterioration leads you to be at that point? Does it mean you get to that point? No, but it's like the healthiness level. Maybe there's a threshold to it.
It sounds like the scientific version of preppers. Like they're creating all of these hypothetical scenarios, but it's like 150, man. I'm not sure there's much science that would back up any claims of reality. Like,
do you say that because you've been looking at details and you listen to stuff, or just because that's just your guess?
This sounds the similarity between that and a prepper who's like, I'm going to do this when this happens. It sounds very similar to that. So no, I haven't looked at all the studies, but he hasn't looked at all the studies either.
Oh no, no, nor has anybody. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Any plans for 150 sounds like the best laid plans of mice and men to me.
Oh yeah.
It's a fun. If he's saying it in a fun hypothetical scenario, sort of joking situation, yes. But if he's serious about like anything related to 150,
I'll make it clear. No one I've ever seen has ever said like, oh, I'm gonna at least like the POTs and others. I'd be like, oh yeah, we're living to 150. That's not what anyone has ever said. Okay. The only one who's ever said that is the real life extension folks of
David Sinclair
and what's the
DeGray.
What was the other guy?
Aubrey DeGray.
No, there's another guy, tall guy. But anyways, all of them do talk about 150, 180, and in that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a little bit okay. Then you can see all the details and the explanations that they're talking about and how to do it. Look, good on them if they get there, but that just sounds like a pain just to get to that level. Like that sounds painful. I'm like, this sounds like a whole load of bullshit. Like have you ever looked into like the color spectrum of lights that they talk about? So they're like, oh, have 30 minutes of red light and 20 minutes of yellow light on your balls, and then blue light into your fucking. I'm like, what? I'm like, man, this is the worst thing. This is the worst thing. And like, I know, what's his name? Anyways, he replaces blood like every 2 years, something like that. Like just stuff like that. I'm like, no, that doesn't even sound like healthy living to me. That just sounds like an over amount of stress to life extension, which I'm like, that kind of even detracts from the whole point of like trying to live a long time.
Yeah.
Well,
as long as they're having fun.
If you were 40 years old,
if
you're 40 years old,
it's 10 years time for me,
and then you broke your wrist so badly that you could never do handstands again, and you for some reason had like some pain in your, let's just say your knees, to the point that it was like tendonitis on a way, and they were like, we're gonna have to fuse your legs. That's the only way you can get past this pain or something like that. So you couldn't walk anymore, apart from like little stumbles sort of thing. Couldn't do any more handstand. Couldn't do any more cardiovascular. Couldn't do any more gym stuff at all. would you at that point say, cool, I still want to live to 100? Like, what sort of mentality would be there?
I have no idea. No idea. That's I wouldn't see why not, but it would depend upon my life quality. Like if I wasn't enjoying living like that, then probably not. But I don't know, these hypotheticals of like what would my life be like if I was blind? What would my life be like if I lost an arm? What would my life be like if I developed a liver disease and like couldn't drink alcohol anymore? Well, that one, it's like, oh, okay, well, alcohol's not a big part of my life. Handstands are, but I'm a realist as well. Like, I know I can't do that forever. Hard.
Unknown to look at them.
Hard to guess.
Okay.
Hard to guess.
Okay.
What you got for me?
I was going to bring this one up.
And a little fun fact here. So this is something I learned from the game, the pickup industry a long time ago. If you're on a date and you want to make the girl feel like she knows you better, you can do this kind of time dilation thing where you jump bars. So in your date, it's not the bars, it's a location. Like if you rapidly change location a bunch of times within 3 hours versus just sitting in one spot for 3 hours, it will feel like she knows you better. Now, I don't have scientific data for this, but just from my general observations and life experience, that kind of seems to indicate to me that it would work.
Okay. Are you saying like from anecdotal data?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There has been an introduction into like, I don't know how broad this is. At least I know Andrew Huberman and a few others have talked about it now, that they're introducing like anecdotal data as data.
Okay.
Into some of the scientific studies.
How's that work?
which he was saying, like, he was like, I don't know if it's like correct. I think it's called like anectodata or something like that.
Fucking hell,
I was like,
some BS.
what is this shit? But it's like properly being used now, like in a lot of studies.
You can use stats for anything, man.
So I go, dude, are you serious or what? So if someone came up and was like, I feel fine after getting punched in the head. Okay, like here you go. This guy said that, so like, are we gonna use that? I'm like,
well, this sounds like data.
Scary.
Like, what's the difference between anecdotal data and data? Is it just the rigorousness of...
Well, you got like the level of qualitative data to quantitative data is very different, right? Like if you're doing like how are you going to prove anecdotally that quantum theory entanglement is going on, right? Are you going to say like, oh yeah, this dog that's come up here, it's actually over there or could be here because that's why I felt like it. That's basically qualitative data of quantum entanglement or something like that. Where proper data would be like, oh no, it's got to be a measurable... it's a measurable and repeatable data that you can actually pull out.
Yeah.
It's not anecdotal data. So, yes, it is all data as input, but that is different from like...
Good.
Anecdotal and like repeatable data is very different.
This just sounds like one of those things where it's...
Oh, it sounds like
they
BS.
chucked the name onto something and it's actually probably statistically has some validity.
Nah, I disagree. It just sounded like even Andrew was like, "This is pretty bullshit." He was like, what the hell is this? Like a lot of people are like, "Why are they doing this? This is just nonsense." I don't know if it's in the sporting world more so, maybe because you have to kind of be really qualitative. So when you talk about like RPE performance, it's like okay, and for those who don't know, it's relative performance exertion, I think it is. So if you say, "Oh, how much RPE was that?" Okay, that felt like a 7.5 out of 10. Okay, cool. This was like a 5 out of 10. So it's really out of 10, you're trying to say how relatively hard that was in the moment. That's qualitative data. That's anecdotal data. That's not like, could you measure it and repeat it in a consistent basis? Probably not, because every person's going to be different. But that's like a level of anecdotal data, I guess. So if I was to say, what's more difficult? A handstand for a minute or a bench press of 160 kilos, right? And if what they're basically trying to do is like, 10 people did it, the bench, and 10 people did the handstand, and these people gave us like an RPE of 8, and these people gave an RPE of 4. Cool, the bench press is harder. And it's like, man, that's like, there could be so many other facets that you could talk about of like why it's harder, why it's easier, why it's whatever.
They already do that a lot, so I don't see why you'd change that name to anecdotal data. Like that, those like all psychological studies are like that, How happy are you on this scale of 0 to 10? How, you can measure dopamine maybe in the brain or something, but...
What, as in like in psychological like papers, they use like the relative judgment of someone?
Yeah, because they do it for tons of things, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this might be a sporting thing.
Customer satisfaction. Any data related to customer satisfaction would be, how did the customer feel? You know, every single one of those things you've done online for a survey or whatnot. You know, that's all just.
I don't know if that's a published journal thing though. You know, I'm talking like published journal.
I'm sure there would be. I'd be willing to bet on that.
Karen's betting out his ass here because he has not ever looked into any of these details.
Fuck off! Like anything you say is any better.
Folks, let us know. Send me through a boostergram. How much shit is Karen
Juan
talking?
likes to think he knows. He's more scientifically rigorous than me, but it's just not true.
The answer is yes. I think Karen's. You can feel it in Karen's voice here. He realized that the handstands are easy stuff, so he's trying to deviate. There was this conversation with Tim Harris, and I wrote down the name so I could don't get the name wrong. Her name's Meg Smaker, which was like an interesting last name.
Sounds like a
Meg Smaker. I was like, man, I'm gonna get this wrong. Yeah, and this, I mean, apart from the fact that she was like a super weird, interesting person, because Sam made the podcast completely open because he usually puts it behind a paywall, and had like a massive background on her, because at the very beginning they're talking about how she made a documentary called Jihab Rehab. I don't know if you've heard about this, Jihab Rehab.
No.
Now, somehow, like her background story, and you would think that she's nuts. I thought that she was nuts, dude, in a lot of ways. So she was a fireman. She was a fireman in the US.
Like just standard like Caucasian.
Standard Caucasian, tall Caucasian female in the sort of the fire department. And when September 11 happened, her reaction to that, her immediate reaction to it was to go straight to Afghanistan, like as soon as possible, to understand why that had happened. Mm-hmm. Like that was her immediate reaction. And she went there, and I can't remember where she lived and stayed, like in around those parts of the world for a long time. And eventually got to a point that she was like, she came across a jihadist rehab, basically, and she made a documentary about it. Now, the podcast conversation was about the fact that she got that documentary up on Sundance and a couple of other places, and she thought like, this is really cool, I want to get it out, because she turned into being a documentarist, basically. And she was cancelled. Like the Sundance was like, no, we're not going to do this because they got pressure from other places. Unsure where, they didn't like really say in the podcast, but was like, no, we don't want to show like this, I guess, this opposite light, this different media to jihadism, I guess. And so whatever, so they were talking about that. So obviously she got cancelled, but her mentality of like, female Caucasian, that, you know, as soon as this has happened, her number one thing is not, you know, anger, but you might expect, or frustration, or maybe staying away. Her first thing was like, I've got to go there and figure out why.
No, I can understand that.
And she explained like a lot of the details behind why she's going to come to that. A couple of more stories as well. So between, I think she said it was like, I might get these years wrong, but between 2001 and 2004, she was in Afghanistan in that area, and then she went to Colombia. And I can't remember what she was doing there. It was maybe exploring the area in the north area. No, it wasn't drugs. It was like she was trying to experience something in the north. Got kidnapped by the AUC, because they thought that she was in FARC country at the north side. They killed most of the people that she was with and all the members of the tribes, and the AUC in Colombia, kind of famous for, they hate the FARC, and they will kill people by just beheading them and gutting them in front of their families. So they'll just do that. And so she was like, okay, I guess I'm going to die. But she ended up talking to this like 16-year-old girl who was there. And she said, I had like this quite joyous conversation, kind of like got to the knowledge of like, this person's just like me, just kind of normal, just a normal human person who just kind of by way of life just has sort of stumbled upon this way and doesn't think too badly of this, or her mentality is very different, or the media that she's consumed, etc. Just very different. So as soon as she got released, I think it was, she got released, she basically was like, you know, at that point I was okay, so, and I think Sam was saying this, like, so you went home and like, you know, kind of like unwinded. Nah, she went directly back to Afghanistan. She was like, I've got to find out now why. Like, because, you know, I talked to this like 16-year-old captor of mine and all these people who were trying to kill me. I need to go back to Afghanistan and figure out like, why is it that they were doing this to go against, sort of thing. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a very interesting mentality to have. And I can kind of see why a person might do that, but I was like, damn, that is not the normal reaction, or at least not my reaction that I would have to such a thing. But so one part I thought that was really interesting. So if you want to check out Me Immortal, it's at Meg Smaker documentary, because I haven't, but it seemed interesting. So I was like, man, that was like a really interesting background of a person I didn't expect. That probably made a doco that's quite interesting in nature. And I guess the one call I would be to you, I was going to ask you a question. Have you ever met a person that surprised you that much? Like maybe you expected them, maybe they were, I don't know, tall, like Caucasian person who you'd expect to just be like maybe a surfer or something like that, and all of a sudden it was like 180. No, they're I don't know, freaking whatever. They enjoy traveling to, the Middle East and I don't know, doing like bike rides across the mountains or something like wild that you'd be like, okay, this was not what I expected at all.
Not super wild, but there was a guy I met here just after COVID, and coming across him in the park. Geez, I've forgotten his name. It's in my list of park people names. And on the surface, he is very kind of Bogan-like. You just expect, like, the way he speaks is just kind of like, man, this is just classic Bogan.
Yeah.
Classic Bogan. And so Bogan is like the Australian version of redneck, for those who are unaware. And yet then when we started speaking, it was like, oh, shit. He's like he's actually a bit of a traveler. Oh shit, he's lived in Argentina. Oh shit, I think we were, cross paths roughly at the same time in the same location. Like, oh shit, his Spanish is really good. It's oh shit, he likes to dance and has got like this big like love of Latino culture. Oh shit, like he's thinking of starting up a podcast and things like that. It's just went like, whoa, okay, I'm very similar to this guy, but on the outside, I guess we're both two Caucasian guys, so maybe that's that's not. But he surprised me. I just went, oh wow, there's a lot more depth to this guy than
actually that's a good call.
I would have said from the surface.
Yeah, actually that's a good call. Because I don't think most people would see you at first glance and be like, oh, he's a language person and really likes like Latin culture and things like that. I think that probably would be slightly different.
Like I wear I suppose like I wear soccer jerseys, so it's funny. So I don't wear them because I really care that much about Messi or the Colombian national team. It's more like, oh yeah, I just like Colombia and sort of like Argentina.
Culture behind it, yeah. That's true. Yeah, because apart from that, I've never met anyone who surprised me that much. Like it was the expected, like, oh yeah, that's sort of what I expect, either by, just the general gist of who a person should be or the area that they live in. But just hearing like that sort of person speak, I was like, oh wow, that's like, I was like such a different person that I'm not unable, but like it's hard to like really understand. Like I have to like real dig deep and be like, what do you mean? Like, why would you do that? That makes like real no sense to me. Like, where does that come from? Yeah,
well, most of the time your physical exterior, your appearance kind of reflects decisions you've made in life. You've obviously put a lot of time in the gym, and if you've got dreadlocks, that kind of usually says something about you in terms of your mentality to maybe government, in terms of what you think of healthy living choices. You're more likely to be vegan, that sort of thing. So it is it is usually a good assumption to make, like, oh, if this person's wearing, like baggy jeans, gold bling on their necks, blah blah blah, maybe they're involved in like the rap scene, or that's the kind of background they came up from. You can make some assumptions. So it is hard to get surprised, because people are generally, you can get a feel from the outside.
Like there's a reason why there are those like groupings or
stereotypes.
There's a reason why we say, such and such would look like this, and they would do that because that's what generally happens. Or you might just grow into that sort of group think as well. So I just thought, it was really, really interesting. That podcast, it was one of the few Sam Harris ones that I've listened like end to end as of late, because a lot of them say, okay, I'll get a general gist and just go off and do something else.
Yeah, I've kind of gone off of him. I think it's funny how many of the ones I've stopped listening to, I think is more related to the medium rather than their actual content. So
the medium.
Yeah, so when he started doing paywalls, I'm not a fan of that. When Joe Rogan moved over to Spotify, and then I had to listen over there, like I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah.
So it is becoming more obvious to me that the things that I consume are kind of related to how they run it in a way. And this actually gets onto the last topic I had was, I like the idea of being able to support early supporters. So, to give back.
Support early supporters.
Yeah, so that kind of feedback loop of the value for value. We give you value, you give it back, and then we give it back again. And then it's like it just keeps going on and on. And we try and do this in small ways with the shirts. I'm not wearing my Mere Mortals one at the moment, but if you reach 100,000 satoshis of sending in to us, we'll basically
give it back. We'll give it back to you.
It'll be all going straight back to you, but in shirt form, not in
not in the monetary form that you signed
direct Bitcoin. And I reached out to Peter not too long ago. He hasn't got back to me yet, but I came up. We did a brainstorming session, and he'd reached 1 million satoshis. So thank you, Peter. Mad shout out. And so I reached out to him. Was like, hey, we can do some things. We could potentially have like a chat on the phone. Like if that was interesting to you, we could. What else did we say? We said like merchandise. I was saying
like shoes.
There was a whole bunch of things, and. I'm looking more and more into, as I mentioned not too long ago, with the different ways of doing value for value, trying out and being a busker, so doing it with a non-digital product. What it would be like with an actual physical product.
By the way, I actually learned that you can't just busk; you need a license for it as well.
Yeah,
I was like,
I know
I didn't even know that, man. I was like, damn.
Yeah. It's pretty easy. It's like $15, $20 or something. So it's not too hard. And one of the things I was, people are starting to do NFTs a lot, and like I said with that Uncut FM, there's podcasters who are doing NFTs to, support early supporters. There's one coming out. I remember Gary Vee talked with this guy who's it's called Loud Punks, and it's kind of a big music festival in the US. Actually overseas as well, mostly hip-hop related from what I can tell. And if you buy this thing, it'll give you a lifetime access, or at least that's what they're promoting and promising. And I like the idea, but it's also like I'd be very careful for anyone doing this who's interested in value for value of kind of making it this investment type thing. So, for example, step 3 of the Howey test, we've talked about this a little while ago, was reasonable expectation of profit. So if you're doing value for value, I think it doesn't work if you're creating like an NFT or some sort of way where it's like, if you invest in us, there is a reasonable expectation of profit coming back to you. I think that kind of breaks the value for value mentality in a way, which is there's no guarantees. Like it's based on our kind of performance. We're meant to make a really great product for you, and I think there's something weird about it if you're trying to do value for value, but then there's also you're adding this element in of like investment opportunity type thing, which is also weird because I want to give back to Peter. Like he's supported us tremendously over this past year, but I also don't want it to make it like he's like, oh, I can invest in the Mere Mortals sort of thing.
I agree.
It's kind of this.
I don't see the value for value model of podcasting at the very least being attached to, or successfully being attached to, something where there's unreasonable expectations of monetary value or investment of some
reasonable
kind.
Or
unreasonable.
So what does that mean?
As
so
in, like if you were to say that, hey, if you're listening to me, then you can expect to get this NFT, and this is going to go to the moon, and it's going to make a lot of money, so you're all going to get a lot of money. I don't think the basis of that underpins differences.
Well, what about reasonable? So in this case, it'd be like, hey, we're creating this NFT. If you buy this for this episode, I will have this automatic system set up so that you can use this NFT to put in a Lightning address, and that Lightning address will automatically update in our RSS feed. How the fuck you would do this, I have no idea. And then there would have to be some kind of like centralization in some way, which would kind of defeat the purpose of the NFT.
That's where you'd use a rewritable blockchain.
That's it. But if you were promising things like that. Like that's not unreasonable. This is exactly what's going to happen. I still think that would kind of break the value for value system in a way. I think weird things would come out of that. I
think weird things would do it. The way you explained it, it would be reasonable if you had data to back it up. If you were saying that with no understanding of what it would be split and what they would get, then that's unreasonable because there's no proof behind it. It's like you're just making it up. Like that's like to say, oh, if someone's listening to this right now and you send us this thing, then we promise you, like, you're going to get money in the way of the next episode from whatever gets sent. Now, they themselves could have an unreasonable expectation, and we might be able to put, like, a reasonable expectation to say, like, oh, this is how much you'll get back. But I agree, though, with you in terms of, like, it's still, you're underpinning the value to something different. You're now in an expectation of you're going to earn something, where the earn is the value of the podcast, not the earn because you make money from it. Now, that's a bonus, but it shouldn't be the value. Like, that will quickly change the dynamics, what the value is. Yeah. Because at that point, they'll be like, well, now I don't care what you're talking about. Make something that's going to make a lot of views so I can make money.
Exactly, yeah.
Which can be a challenge, So I'd say, that is a difficulty if you go down that path. So
for sure.
With that, let's go to finish it up. Value for value. Why should folks be using value for value? Where are you going to recommend to come in and use a Boostergram and check it out?
So like we're saying, well, value for value, do not expect investments from us, but if you donate in through these kind of thresholds that we've said, so 100K for getting a immortal shirt, $1 million if something
else,
there will be a reaching out of some sort for sure if you reach 1 million sats. And
if you reach 100 million, we'll also reach out.
Like fucking full Bitcoin. That would be wild.
If you send 100 million Bitcoin, if you send 100 million Satoshis right now as part of this episode, I promise we will reach out and we will have a chat.
Dang, that's unreasonable, man. That's I don't know. My time is money, man. No, so we do all this free for you. You can consume this however you want and whatever platform you want.
That's right. Spotify, I'd recommend.
Fucking get out of here, motherfucker. And you can use Spotify, you can use Apple, you can use any of these other apps, and there are some fantastic apps like apparently a lot of people like Pocket Casts. Although I believe they're becoming open source.
I'm going to say it. I still think Spotify is the best one out of them all. Still, it's still the better one.
When was the last time you experimented?
I can see. I did try Fountain before Tasmania.
Yeah. Did you try their car? So they've got the car one now.
No. I'll just say it. I don't give a shit. Like, I don't give a shit about the.
Really? I thought you were saying the car thing was what was stopping you.
I thought it was until I realized it wasn't.
Yeah.
And for some reason, at least for me personally, I still go. I don't give a shit about chapter art. Like, I don't give a shit that at 20 minutes I see this image or whatever.
I understand that. Yeah.
But it's starting to tip for me of like I see Spotify and some of the premium ones like say Fountain. Very, 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 very similar. Like that's for me now, I know. If the type of podcast that I listen to flipped over to be in Fountain, I'm talking things like Tim Ferriss, Andrew Huberman, a few others.
What do you mean by flipped over?
Flipped as in like they
were promoting it.
Not promoting it, but they were participating in that space, or like you could listen to the podcast there and send them Boostergrams and the like. I would be there in a heartbeat. Like at this point now, they're so well like versed. So like, don't take it as I'm saying like, oh, Spotify is like way better as an application. No, it's just like where my normal like landing point is.
It's just easy. Like I'm the same, man. Like I've told you this before. I don't go to Spotify to follow Joe Rogan there because I don't want to go to Spotify. Like I like YouTube. YouTube is my podcasting listening / viewing experience app. That I listen to Tim Ferriss on there, for example, even though a lot of the time his is just a plain image and not anything. So no, I get that, but there's a lot of value you can get from these things. So it's there is the chapter art, but then there's also the linkages. So I put a link in for everyone.
And that would be good.
And usually it is somewhat related to it, and if not, it's just a link to our own website. So you can check that out and and see that. So yeah, like there's all these like little additional things that are happening over on these different apps. So newpodcastapps.com, and we really appreciate it if you send in through a boostergram. So a message within the actual app that goes directly to us. So if you want the most efficient method of communication, and it helps.
Boostergram.
It makes sense because they were talking about this on Podcasting 2.0 recently, where it's still like not perfect, but when someone sends it in, you can kind of tell, especially if it's a non sequitur thing, like, man, that piece of information was wrong. Lol, that was super funny. And if you try to send that through via Instagram, that would just be weird. And I know because I've done this before. So doing it within the actual app itself it makes so much more sense, and it's a good experience all around. So good ones, we've mentioned Fountain, Podverse, Curocaster, Castomatic,
New podcast.
Breeze, newpodcastapps.com. Choose any of them, send us through a boostergram. And if you don't know what that is, then I don't know, it's a long process to explain. You'll need to understand about Bitcoin first. Check out my review of the Bitcoin Standard on the Mere Mortals book reviews, and that's a good place to start.
To guide you, exactly.
Cool.
Right. Good. We'll leave it at that, Mere Mortals. I hope you enjoyed the meandering session wherever you are in the world. Take care. Enjoy yourselves. Juan out.
Karen out. You.